From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Free Expression with Gerry Baker.
Hello and welcome to the Free Expression podcast from the Wall Street Journal. I'm Gerry Baker, editor-at-large of the Journal. If you're not already a subscriber to Free Expression, please sign up wherever you do your podcast listening. This week, the night that sank Joe Biden. In more than 30 years of watching US presidential debates, I can't recall one that was more calamitous for a candidate than the one we witnessed on Thursday night. For 90 minutes, a nation watched and frequently had to look away as President Joe Biden mumbled, fumbled, and stumbled his way through a head-to-head exchange with former President Donald Trump. This, remember, was a debate that Biden himself had initiated. The venue, the rules, the unusually early timing were all at the president's behest. And why? Well, they were all designed to put to rest doubts Americans have about the mental and physical capabilities of their president 4 months ahead of the election. The whole event was intended by Biden's people to show that the image we had formed of his frailties was somehow just wrong, to demonstrate that this 81-year-old is fully capable of serving in the world's most powerful office for another 4 years. And what we got was the exact opposite. A public, prolonged, painful demonstration of the man's advancing mental weakness and alarming cognitive fragility. His disastrous performance was made worse by an unusually composed and compelling appearance by Trump himself. The former president largely stuck to his script and avoided his trademark loud bellicosity that's turned off voters in the past. Yes, he trotted out his usual share of dubious and downright false statements, but so too did Biden. While some of the media tried to cover a little for Biden by fact-checking, as they call it, Trump statements, the president himself made many, many false claims and assertions. The chorus of Democrats calling for Biden to step down and be replaced was immediately deafening. But it already seems clear, and I'm recording this at noon on Friday, that the White House is determined to push back hard. There's no formal or informal mechanism by which Biden can be denied the Democratic nomination if he wants it. And he seems to have no intention of going anywhere. And in any case, who would replace him if he did? It was striking to me that in all the gnashing of teeth about Biden's unsuitability among Democrats on Thursday night, not one voice I heard said the obvious thing and called for his replacement by the woman that he specifically chose to replace him in the event of a crisis, Vice President Kamala Harris. So what does this Thursday night massacre mean for the election? Is it the critical event that breaks the deadlock of a tight race? Or, like most debates in the recent past, will it just fade into the memory without real consequence? Can Biden recover? With me to talk about all this is my colleague and fellow Wall Street Journal columnist, Karl Rove. Karl, thanks very much for joining Free Expression this week.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Well, we probably don't need to delve too much into the aftermath or into any sort of a post-mortem on that debate last night. But let me just ask you straight off. You've been looking at and involved in presidential campaigns and presidential debates for a very long time. Where does that rank, that Thursday night debate for Joe Biden, in terms of your recollection of presidential debates?
The consistently worst debate I've ever seen by any single candidate. We've seen moments, Bernie Shaw asking Michael Dukakis what would happen if your wife was raped and killed, and, the antiseptic answer he gave. We've seen Jimmy Carter talking about his 14-year-old, consulting her on nuclear disarmament. But what we saw last night was a train wreck. Somebody who slack-eyed, glassy-eyed, mangled his words, lost his train of thought, couldn't establish eye contact with his opponent, seemed disengaged and way, way too old. And it was an utter, unmitigated disaster.
The guy's been preparing for this supposedly for more than a week. He's kind of locked himself away at Camp David in Delaware. How does this happen?
Well, the inexorable march of time, I think, because, they gave him a week to get ready for this, and this is what we got. And I got to tell you, I was astonished. For a year, though, I've been wondering what Jill Biden is thinking and what his sister, Valerie Biden Owen, are thinking. His wife is the closest person on the face of the planet to him. The second closest is his sister, who's played an intimate role in every campaign since he ran for the county council, like in 1968. And last night was the culmination of my doubts about him. What are they thinking? This man is not up to the job, let alone saying, I'm going to be doing it robustly for the next 4 years. So the American people saw last night, look, debates have an impact. that the discussion about a debate and the aftermath of the debate in some instances have an even bigger impact. And I think the conversation that we're going to have as a country here over the next several days is only going to make it worse and worse. Rather than seeing, 9 or 10 moments over a 90-minute period, we're going to have them jammed into a 30-second piece of video that's going to make the rounds on cable TV, network TV, and, the social media.
I want to get onto the implications exactly as you describe and what's going to happen in the next few days and weeks in a minute. But one quick thought about Trump's performance, quite by his standards at least, certainly disciplined.
Yeah, restrained and calm. But look, the story of last night is not that Trump did well. He didn't do very well at all. I mean, the issue platform should distinctly advantage him. Cost of living, inflation, the border crisis, illegal immigration, and the consequences of that, America's role in the world and whether we're respected or not. And while he raised those issues, he wasn't particularly effective at prosecuting those issues or especially creating a vision of what we could expect in a second term. In fact, the best vision we had was when the moderators, who I thought did a superb job of questioning, prompted him and pushed him, like, for example, on Ukraine. Yeah. Is Putin's deal good enough? But the story of last night was not that Trump did well. Against a better debater, he would have been in deep trouble, how bad Biden was. But he was calmer. You could see him getting close to being goaded. There were a few moments where the old Trump rage and anger at the world popped out. But that was after insufficient goading by somebody who was clearly not up to the task.
Let's talk then about what happens with Biden. So I've been noticing very strongly this morning, we're recording this Friday lunchtime, I should say, the campaign is starting to push back pretty hard. The kind of message we're getting is, to paraphrase Joe Biden, come on, man. It was one night. He had a bad night. He wasn't well. He clearly had a cold. Everybody's entitled to a bad debate. Well, let's move on. We're going to move on. Trump's not fit to be president. Biden's going to demonstrate that he is. How effective do you think that response is going to be?
Not very effective. It might ultimately mean that he's still on the ticket, but it's not effective in convincing the many doubters. Look, there are two issues here. One is the depth of his shortcomings. Again, I've never seen anybody perform as badly as he did in the debate, and not in a temporary fashion. If he had a cold, they should have told us that in the last couple of days and prepared us. But no, he's in great spirits and he's going to come and he's going to be strong. No. This wasn't a cold. This was age. This was infirmity. And the second issue is that, look, the Democrats and Republican presidents tend to have a bad first debate. I remember 2004. Bush had a bad debate against John Kerry, and people said, but we could recover it. I think it was like 10 days later in the second debate. Ronald Reagan had a bad first debate in 1984 and then comes back with that devastating line, I will not use my opponent's youth and inexperience as an issue in this campaign. But that was like, less than 2 weeks later. The next debate between these two contenders is 10 and a half weeks off. So this impression is going to linger, and there's nothing that Biden can do short of an extraordinary address at the Democratic Convention, but that itself is like 8 weeks off. So this is going to linger and grow and fester, and the problem is not going to go away by saying, oh, come on, man, he just had a cold. No, he had 81 years of age and a declining ability to handle it.
What do you think is going to happen then in the next few days? Again, we have been hearing an entertaining, if for listeners who want a bit of entertainment, go to the New York Times editorial page this morning where every single item says Joe Biden's got to step aside. The Constitution, the politics, the way these things work. There is really no formal or informal mechanism for removing a president who doesn't want to be removed, right, when he's already won essentially enough primary votes to win his party's nomination. How do you see this playing out, Karl, in the next few days and weeks?
It's funny. I was at the Reagan Institute annual meeting at Lake Tahoe yesterday, and I was asked this question at my presentation, and I said, look, if he does badly tonight, and I thought he could do badly, I didn't know he would do this badly. I said the demand will grow among Democrats that he needs to go. And that is going to happen. We've seen it today, and it's only going to get worse. Sending out Kamala Harris and sending out the come on man squad from Team Biden is not going to make it go away. And what I said yesterday was, if it's bad enough, I think the fathers and mothers of the Democratic Party, Nancy Pelosi and Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer and Barack Obama and blah, 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 will go to him and say, is this how you want to be remembered in history, by the guy being beat by Donald Trump? And I think that's going to be successful. And you're right. There's no formal mechanism, but think about this process. First of all, the delegates to the Democratic National Convention are largely the Biden delegates, all of whom were slated by the Biden campaign. This is not going to be 40% Bernie bros. This is going to be mostly normal Democrats. And there are a bunch of people out there who have been thinking about the possibility of what if something happened to them. They range from the improbable, Governor Goodhair Newsom of California, Pritzker of Illinois, who's too big, Polis of Colorado, Amy Klobuchar, senator from Minnesota, Whitmer of Michigan, whom I think is the sort of semi-front runner, Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky. There'll be a mini effort on behalf of Mitch Landrieu by the Clintonites, Governor Cooper of North Carolina, Governor Murphy of New Jersey wants to run. Wes Moore, even though he's been a governor for only a year and a half, year and 3/4 of Maryland, he'll want to run. Josh Shapiro, if he's smart, won't, but he may be forced into it. Cory Booker has never given up making phone calls. And there are going to be others. Gina Raimondo, Secretary of Commerce, will find New York and Wall Street Democrats particularly enthusiastic. And what will happen is they'll maneuver. And believe me, they were thinking about this. I have it on good authority from independent sources that Pritzker, Whitmer, and Newsom were focused on who are the Biden delegates going to be so that if something happened, they would have a significant block of delegates to go to the convention. So all these people are going to be maneuvering, and we're going to be paying attention to it, and people are going to be endorsing, and people are going to be saying interesting things, and they'll show up in Chicago. We'll have enormous viewership because it's going to be the thing that we have not seen in our lifetime since at least 1976, a convention where the outcome was in doubt when the gavel came down. And think about this. Nobody's going to have a majority on the first ballot, which means on the second and every subsequent ballot, the superdelegates, which is sort of like the House of Lords of the Democratic Party, are going to be able to vote. So Donna Brazile and all these people whose concern is going to be, how can we win, are going to be voting on the second and third. And then they're going to choose a nominee. We got a week before Labor Day, and the American people are going to be very interested in who that person is. And we have a sense of what might happen with Nikki Haley. When she looked like she was coming on in the spring, they put her in head-to-head matches with Joe Biden. And one of them, she was like up by 16 points.
The scenario you just laid out there, and fascinating it is. And my God, stand by your TV sets for the next 2 months. But that's a nightmare for the Democrats. You just reeled off a list of 10, 12 very plausible candidates who'll all fight it out like some sort of demolition derby, an open convention, the likes of which we haven't seen for 50 years, in Chicago, of all places, where the backdrop of pro-Palestinian protests and everything. I mean, isn't all of that what you've just laid out? However bad Biden's performance was, as we all agree it was on Thursday night, isn't all of that the strongest argument for saying, we can't go there, we just got to stick with this guy?
No, I don't think so. It could. I grant you that. And it will be a contested convention. But the difference will be that it is a contested convention where people will only have a limited number of weeks to rub up against each other, and they will not go through a 8 or 9 month process of the run-ups to the primaries and lots of events and lots of debates and going after each other hammer and tong in order to come in second in Iowa, and I came in third in New Hampshire, I got to come in first in South Carolina. There won't be that. So there will not be enough, in my opinion, enough of the trappings of a primary campaign for it to be a contested convention like 1980 between the Democrats or 1976 between Reagan and Ford. It'll be a lot more restrained simply because of the nature. It's going to be, going and speaking at the Jefferson-Jackson Day. Well, they don't call them that anymore. Dinner in Pennsylvania and sitting down with the Governor Shapiro.
So let's be clear. First of all, you do think that this committee of 500 or whatever will prevail upon Joe Biden to step aside where all these...
Well, I think they're going to try. Who knows? But if I had to play some money, I'd bet them on being able to succeed because, look, what evidence do we have that it's going to get better? Is he going to get somehow more youthful? If he couldn't do this with 7 days of rest and seclusion at Camp David with his closest trusted aides, what makes us think that he's not going to, in the next debate, talk about Medicare in the middle of nowhere or, mangle a sentence or lose his train of thought or miss every opportunity? I mean, he had the ability to push back on a couple of points and he ended up going off on, little personal tangents. I mean, it was pitiful. It was sad. It was just really sad.
We're going to take a break there, but when we come back, I'll have more with Karl Rove on Joe Biden's disastrous debate performance on Thursday night and what it might mean for the election. Stay with us.
You're listening to Free Expression with Gerry Baker. Don't forget, you can listen to the latest episode anytime on your smart speaker. Just say, play the Opinion Free Expression podcast. Now, back to Gerry Baker.
I'm back and we're talking about Thursday night's debate, its consequences, and the general election that's looming with Karl Rove. You advised President Bush through, campaign and 2 presidential terms, and you helped see him through some pretty tough times, the fallout from the Iraq War, obviously Katrina, various other things. Admittedly, that was in the second term, so he wasn't running for re-election. But if you were there now, implausible as that is to imagine, Karl, of you being there with Joe Biden, but if you were there after that disaster of Thursday night, would you just say, Mr. President, I'm sorry, it's time to throw in the towel? Or if you were trying to construct some kind of recovery scenario from that, what would you suggest?
I don't see a recovery scenario. I just don't.
Come out and give some big speech or something and show, maybe so self-deprecating and joke, he screwed up the other night, but, he's fit and fine. I don't know.
Well, first of all, there's going to be nothing that's going to have the viewership of that. Even his convention speech is not going to have 60, 70, 80 million people watching. Second of all, self-deprecating humor. Look, we're not dumb. We know that somebody sat in the back room and they game through about a half a dozen of those lines, and then they set up the event, and they allowed him to say to a friendly reporter or to, town hall meeting, blah, blah. But that's phony. What's real is what we saw last night. Look, the best way to think about a presidential campaign is not the masses are asses and we're going to construct some phony scenario in which we mislead them. It is the emperor's new clothes. And we saw the emperor's new clothes, the ending of it last night. It was the emperor at the end of the parade, buck naked, and he wasn't looking so good.
So let's say the scenario does play out, as you've said, that somehow Biden does step aside and we have this kind of interesting beauty contest rather than a kind of a contested primary, which somehow kind of is largely resolved, therefore, before the convention itself. Who do you think they're likely to pick? And whom should Republicans most fear? Is it the same person or are they 2 different people? What's your thought on that?
Well, I don't know, but my gut tells me Whitmer might be the sort of the narrow front runner. She's been in office for 6 years. She ran originally as sort of, I'm going to fix the roads and not as an ideological candidate. She's the governor of a state that is critical. Let's say if Joe Biden stayed in and won the same states he won last time around, except for Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada, where he's trailing already by outside the margin of error. If he won Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, he would be president. 272 to 268, assuming he won the rest of the other states he won and Nebraska too. So she would be critical to a Democrats holding on to the White House. But again, I don't know. And it will be very interesting to see how people react during this relatively short period of time, 8-week period during which this might happen. And look, I don't know if it's going to happen or not. I just think that if they were smart, they'd recognize that what the American people saw last night is not going to go away. And they can't make it go away. And maybe they can go out and have a snappy line, but we'll all know what that is, which is an attempt to undo a really bad situation.
Can we talk about Kamala Harris for a moment? Because as I said in my introduction, it is pretty striking to me that the person he appointed to replace him in the event of a crisis, no one's actually, other than herself, putting herself out on TV last night, no one's talking about her in any serious ways to replace him in a crisis, which says a lot. And I think also, I don't know if you agree, but the Kamala Harris problem in a sense makes Biden's problem worse because people know that if Biden somehow does weather this in the next couple of months and the Kamala Harris ticket is the same one again as it was in 2020. People know now, or have a very high level of confidence, that a vote for Joe Biden is a vote to put Kamala Harris in the Oval Office.
Yeah. So first of all, her numbers are worse than Biden's. She's a terrible person. She's a terrible candidate. She will get stuck with all of the downside of the Biden years and none of the upside. They will be stuck with her as vice president because they can't remove her from the ticket. But there's a utility in doing that, which is it makes it impossible for Gavin Newsom to be the nominee of the Democratic Party. 12th Amendment precludes casting the votes of a state for a presidential and vice presidential candidates from that state. So, you got 2 Californians. You can't have that. So there is some utility to keeping her on the ticket. I have a hunting lease in South Texas, and every year Senator Cornyn invites a couple of his colleagues, 3 or 4 of his colleagues, to come hunting. And we're sitting around the campfire, and I said to one of them who was on a committee with her, I said, what's she like? And this is while she's vice president. And this is a guy who can find something good in everybody. Satan's evil, but he's such a charming dinner companion. And I expected him to say something nice about her. Here's her strengths. Here's her weaknesses. We were all subjected to about a 20-minute rant of how terrible a human being she is. So, no, she's not going to be the nominee of the Democratic Party. She doesn't add, but they can't remove her. I mean, the most loyal constituency of the Democratic Party are older black women, and they will not stand for her to be removed from the ticket.
And they can't remove her from the ticket. But as you say, again, if we do get into this competition, into this contest for the Democratic nomination, it's pretty tough, isn't it, for the Democrats, for whom identity party politics is so important. The first woman of color to be on a presidential ticket. Vice presidents typically have a kind of an inside track for their party's nomination. It's going to be pretty hard for them to say to those delegates, actually, you know what? She's not suitable. She can't be president. You can't vote for her. Don't you think?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. One is, I don't think she's made a lot of friends. B, I don't think she's demonstrated skills that immediately cause people to say, you know what, the problem of removing Biden can be solved by replacing him with her. And third of all, go back to California. My point earlier, Newsom, Pritzker, and Whitmer, I have it on good authority from people in each one of those states inside the Democrats, went out of their way to make certain that they had influence over the delegation. And so you're not going to have the California delegation saying, you know what, Biden's gone, but by God, as one, we're together in supporting Kamala Harris. Remember, her boyfriend was Speaker Brown, and he wrote an op-ed in the San Francisco Chronicle while she was under consideration for vice president saying, don't accept it. If you're offered it, don't accept it. You're not ready. Ask to be made attorney general. Now, if your boyfriend of, a decade doesn't think that you're up to it, maybe there's a problem.
So again, what if somehow Biden does stay on the ticket? As you say, you don't know. You think he probably will be replaced.
Yes.
If he does, how important will last night's debate prove?
Critical.
You think it's the sort of thing that breaks the deadlock. And as you said, there's no coming back from him. So you think that if he stays on now, the chances that Trump wins this election have taken a big, big leap in the last 24 hours?
Well, they've taken a leap. They were already pretty good, and they will not be an absolute certainty because each candidate has its own shortcomings. But he's created now a ceiling for himself. I suspect the polls will show he, meaning Biden, declining in the head-to-head matchup with Trump, and it's going to be hard for him to recover any of that lost ground. Because again, that image is going to be there until and unless there's a second debate in which there's dramatic improvement and the roles are reversed. And who thinks that's likely to happen?
We've talked about Vice President Kamala Harris. We've got probably a week or so before we learn the identity of Donald Trump's vice president. What's your latest thinking on that?
Well, my thinking is that I don't know. And what guides me in my thinking is you have to think about Donald Trump's mindset. And he's the executive producer of The Apprentice. So there are two different camps. One camp is I want somebody who can be the attack dog and who loves me. And I'd love it if it was somebody who once said ugly things about me and now bends the knee and slavishly tells me how great I am. Or there's also, you know what, I want a surprise. And the essence of the surprise is that people say, wow, that person could be the president. And the former approach is a dead end, and the latter approach is a way to cement his standing. There are two brilliant young political scientists who wrote a book called Do Running Mates Matter? And they marshal all kinds of evidence, polling data and so forth, to say three things. One is no vice presidential candidate brings you a state that you would otherwise not get. Going back to maybe the last example of where that was the case is 1960 in Texas and Lyndon Johnson. Right. But in the modern era, it doesn't matter. There's no group with which there are durable changes in their attitudes and support for you over the course of the campaign that remain. The only significant impact is on how your decision causes people to view you as a capable leader. Ronald Reagan says, I'm going to pick the guy who was my principal primary opponent. You've gotten to know him. Ambassador to China, ambassador to the UN, director of the CIA, respected member of Congress, seems to be highly well qualified. And he gave me a run for my money, and I'm picking him as my running mate. And Reagan's numbers went up. John McCain picks Sarah Palin, and his numbers go down.
All right, so give us a name. Where does that lead us? I mean, it sounds like you're talking like a Nikki Haley.
No, he's not big enough. He's not Ronald Reagan. He's not going to pick Nikki Haley. Not going to do that. But, it does say that a Tim Scott or a Doug Burgum or a Glenn Youngkin, or here's one, this would be a big surprise, because it's a name not being bandied about, Mike Pompeo. All of those people would say, wow, they're capable of doing the job, and wasn't that an impressive choice? And Tom Cotton would be another one from Arkansas. And if we didn't know them, we get to know them, and we get to know them in either Tim Scott's personal background and what a remarkable rise from poverty and bigotry to the United States Senate. Doug Burgum, literally the guy who literally mortgages the family farm to start a software company in the middle of nowhere, North Dakota, and turns it into a gigantic firm that gets sold to Microsoft for $1 billion+ and been successful governor of a state that's the second largest energy producer. Tom Cotton served in the military with distinction, bright, young, unbelievably thoughtful leader. Glenn Youngkin, private equity guy with a wonderful personality and a winning manner, who took a state that Joe Biden won by 10 points and flipped it and has been doing a terrific job as governor. All of these things would, to my mind, not only elevate the person, but more importantly, they would elevate Trump because people would say, well, Trump made a really good choice. That's what I want in my president. Make good choices.
Well, Karl Rove, it's going to be a wild, hot political summer, and I can't think of anybody better to set it up for us. Karl, thanks very much indeed for joining Free Expression, and have a very happy July 4th.
Same to you, sir.
Well, that's it for this week's episode of Free Expression. Thanks very much for joining us. In the meantime, have a great July the 4th holiday, and I look forward to speaking to you again.